Hey, everybody, welcome back to the show. Super excited, thrilled to have Eric Anderson with us today. He is the co founder and chief technology officer of SynMax. Eric, welcome to the show. Super excited to have you.
Thanks for having me, Kip.
My pleasure. My pleasure. So I usually start out with origin story, kind of like comic book episode one. Just tell us, who is Eric Anderson, and how did you get to be doing what you're doing right now and launching SynMax?
Yeah, sure. I'm not sure it would make a very good comic book, but my background is I used to work in finance. So, my degrees, finance and investment analysis. I pursued the CFA program, the Chartered Financial Analyst program. So, passed all three levels. I have my CFA. In a former life, I worked for commodity trading firms, Merrill Lynch, and then Skyler Capital. And the SynMax story really started when I was at Skyler Capital, right? So I was a quant there, a quantitative analyst, and
Okay.
my job was to take these raw data sets, which we could either purchase from people or we could scrape ourselves and kind of shape those into mature models that we could trade on. And we discovered while we were there that there was an excess of something we like to call privileged data, right? So if you divide the entire data value chain up into three components, there's the open source data, which I think most people are familiar with. It's the kind of stuff that you can scrape off the internet. You can get regulatory information, you can get bits and pieces of information off of social media. There's a lot out there that, especially since the proliferation of the internet, a lot of people have started scraping, packaging, and selling as data sources. But then there's this other market called privileged intelligence, which is basically intelligence that you can get privately. You have to purchase it, right? This is primarily, sensor-based intelligence, right? So, for example, in equities, a very common data set, people can purchase anonymized credit card transactions, and they can use that to try and get a lead on, how a retailer's earnings are going to be, or maybe even get like a consumer sentiment leading indicator or that kind of thing. In our space, it's largely these satellite sensors and drone sensors that we use to gather intelligence, which, we can dive into the history of that in a moment. But the third type of intelligence is something everybody's familiar with, which is classified, right? So, we
Right.
categorize these based on how difficult they are to acquire, right? And the classified being the most difficult, the privilege being the one that SynMax really specialized in, and the open source, which is one that, it's kind of had this long history of development, really since the advent of the internet. So, at Skyler, we got really good at finding value in these privileged data sources. We were one of the first companies that started purchasing commercial satellite imagery in bulk. And we were using that data to monitor oil and gas assets. And, we had a lot of success in looking at these images, applying early forms of AI, because this was quite a few years ago, right? AI has come a very long ways, but, it was still very much at the time the application tool that let us scale this kind of mass ingestion, and then catching trends kind of before the rest of the market could, in order to place profitable trades. So the president and primary trader of that hedge fund is Bill Perkins. Bill loved these models. He immediately
Uh-huh.
saw the vision for how, you could have an intelligence company, somebody that specializes in kind of the mass ingestion of privileged intelligence to create data intelligence products. So he formed the original idea for SynMax
Okay.
as his quant at the time. He brought me along as employee number one and CTO, co-founder. And we started the company about 3.5, 4 years ago. So, it was a really small operation, and at the time, we had a couple of ideas for data intelligence products that we could create, but we wanted to use kind of an iterative approach of, maybe creating MVP versions of these and then testing them against the market to see where the demand signal was. And the two that really stuck, and the two that are still our primary products today, are called Hyperion and Thea. So they both operate on the same basic proficiency that we've developed, which is mass ingestion of commercial satellite imagery. On the Hyperion side, we're tracking rigs and frac crews for commodity hedge funds, so they
Okay.
can better predict what oil and gas is going to be produced in the U.S., 3, 4 year out, right? And then on the Thea side, we are doing a maritime domain intelligence product, also based on the mass ingestion of satellite imagery, but to a
Hmm.
much, much larger scale. So to give you an idea, the world's oceans, I think, are around 300 million square kilometers. It's gigantic, right? Very
Yes.
difficult to monitor. We're ingesting satellite imagery for around 30 million square kilometers, so about 10% of it right now, every single
Wow.
day. And from that, we can, not just detect ships, but we can also attribute them, classify them, and persist a history of them, whether they're transponding or not. So yeah, I mean that's kind of the origin story of SynMax. Generally we're an intelligence company. We're not limited to just these two products. These are kind of our first entrance into the market, but our goal is to become a premier privileged source intelligence company.
That's incredible. And is it mostly to intelligence for, as you said, hedge funds and other investment groups?
Yeah, so right now, that's really what the customer set is. And I think that's a symptom of the fact that these technologies are very early, or at least the data sources that support them are, right? So our customer set is probably 60-40, government defense, right? So
Okay.
we have a couple of government contracts, several government contracts, entirely on the Thea side, right, for this kind of intelligence,
Sure.
and then hedge funds and banks on the commodity side. So, I think that's kind of where this market has to start, right? Because it's a very new technology.
Yes.
The advent of commercial satellite imagery has only been around, really in any meaningful form for the last 10 or 15 years. It's a very new industry. And when an industry launches like that, it's expensive,
Right.
because you need the economies of scale and the growth and the competition to drive down prices. And so the natural places to start when you're selling an intelligence product is the type of customers who have the closest relationship to turning intelligence into value, right? I
Okay.
think every single business in the world can take intelligence about their market, about their competitors, and somehow transform that into value, but it's usually very indirect, right? If I sell, information about, I don't know, the competitive landscape to a large company, I'm not going to name any ones in particular, but to
Yeah.
a large
Yeah.
company in particular, there is no doubt that that's valuable information. But the way that that transforms into value for them is kind of through their decision making. So it
Okay.
becomes opaque and they can't really measure the direct output. What's different about government, hedge funds, and banks is they can measure the output directly, right? So
Sure.
a trader can take a good piece of intelligence and they can turn it into a profitable trade and they can see the value and benefit to them. So that supports, a much higher value proposition where we're selling it. And the government, of course, they have national interests, which are almost priceless,
You're
right?
right.
And when they can get key pieces of intelligence, the value to them is tremendous. So I think because this industry is early, that's kind of where it's going to start. But as it grows and as the prices come down for the data sources, which they'll inevitably do through competition and economies of scale, we're going to see that grow, kind of down the stack into, more common household name businesses.
Yeah. Do you just due to the nature of the business? I mean, do you need extensive both like physical and cybersecurity for just the data that you have?
So our data is unclassified,
Okay.
right? We are interested in exploring, the integration into the classified side. We know that a lot of our data is currently being ingested by the government and mixed with classified data, but
Okay.
we don't have any official part in any of that. So, regardless of whether it's classified or not, it is, cybersecurity is absolutely essential,
Right.
as it is for any company that's operating. I mean, this is,
Yeah.
we're essentially a software company. So this is our product, and we have to take all the measures we can to protect our revenue by protecting our data.
Sure. So I mean, is there an ability for you to get access to classified data or like
No,
how
we
does that
do we do
work?
not. No, we do not
Okay.
have. So if you wanted to get access to classified data as a company, you'd have to have what's called a facility clearance, right?
Okay.
And a facility clearance would let you then have people within the company who have their clearances sponsored by the company, and then they can participate in classified government contracts, as well as they can get access to under agreements with agencies in the government to classified information. I mean, it's definitely something we're looking into, right? Because we see that our data is already being integrated with other classified sources. So at the very least, we would like to be able to sit at the table, see how that's doing,
Sure.
advise, right, on the best way to kind of integrate these sources together. We can't do that right now because we don't have a facility clearance. But
Hmm.
our long-term strategy is definitely to pursue that.
Yeah, that's very interesting. How so you launched the company about 4 years ago. How is the growth or scaling up, or who have been key to the types of people you've put together on a team to make this work and grow?
Yeah, so the gross is, I mean, this is the first time I've ever done this, right? I was a
Uh-huh.
finance guy.
Yeah, right.
This is my first startup, so I'm not sure what I can compare it against. For me, it's been an absolute whirlwind. So, we started the company 4 years ago and I was the only employee. And then
Okay.
today we have around 100 employees.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, in 3 different office locations around the world. So we've seen a tremendous amount of growth. There's a huge demand for these types of data intelligence products, especially in the fields I talked about before. Um, yeah, scaling is no joke, and it's like I said before, it's not something I've done before. So I'm still having to learn a lot of hard lessons about the right way to do it. You asked about the kind of people, right? I think that's that is one of the most essential questions for any company
For
is
sure.
how do you find and attract and retain the right kind of quality of people, because everybody knows that a company is really just the aggregate of all the people that you hire to it, right? So yeah, we've had a lot of success in attracting really good people. I think the fact that what we work on being really exciting and
Hmm.
interesting has been a huge benefit to us, right? I mean, probably 60 of the 100 people that work here are software developers or data
Okay.
scientists or somewhere in between, right? And these people have great skills that are very valuable in the marketplace, right? And they can go work for a big stable company like Google, Apple, and Facebook. But if they go there, they're very likely to be put on kind of a very minor niche thing. Like I'm going
Sure.
to optimize, this button on this web page, right, over the entire course of my career, right?
Right.
When they come to SynMax, they get a much wider scope, which is a very attractive thing for them. And they get to play a part in a much larger and I think much more interesting project, which is the discovery of novel intelligence out of these huge data sources. So I don't know that I have the perfect answer for how do you find the right people, right? There's uh, a million different opinions, and I'm not sure mine are any
Right.
more valuable than others. But I like to look for people that are excited about the mission,
Mm.
right? I like to look for people that they're obviously you want to compensate everybody fairly, but like in addition to wanting fair compensation, which of course you always have to provide, right? The work itself is exciting to them, and we had a lot of success there.
No, absolutely. How in that startup mode, have you been very intentional about culture, core values, those types of things as you've scaled the business? Or, I mean, sometimes,
Culture is a
yeah,
very interesting topic, right?
right.
So again, it goes back to the people, right? And culture setting from the top is important, but it's not always effective. Again, the
Mm.
culture is going to be the aggregate of the people you hire, right?
Hmm.
If you hire um, you know people with a certain set of values, regardless of the culture setting that you do from the top, which you must do, which is important, you're going to be in a constant battle to kind of establish and set those values, right? So culture comes from the people itself. We set a culture that is very much this is a startup. This is a company where we have to move fast, right? We don't have the size advantage in this market, right? There are companies that are much larger than us. So the only advantage we can have is speed, right?
Mm.
And we
Yes.
believe that's essential. We believe that, the history of disruptive capitalism proves that it's not the big that eat the small, it's the fast that eat the slow, right?
Right.
And our only barrier is speed. So, when we're interviewing and bringing people into the company, right, we like to see people that are extremely motivated. We like to be upfront with them. We like to say this is not a 40-hour a week job, right?
Uh-huh.
This is going to be a 60 or 70-hour a week job. And if you're not comfortable with that, that's completely fine. Like we're not enemies, right?
Right.
We
Yeah.
just
Yeah.
don't think that this is the fit for you, right? If you're somebody who gets excited about your work, if you're somebody who's willing to commit a lot of hours to it, right? Then this is a better fit.
Yeah. No, absolutely. How about leadership? How is, as you've gone from employee number one to scaling to 100 people, how has your personal definition of leadership evolved over time, whether it's just with SynMax or even before that?
Yeah, it's going through constant evolution. I mean, I've learned the hard way through a lot of mistakes, right? I think the first leadership mistake I made was delegation, right?
Mm.
So, when I was at Skyler, um, I was directly responsible for the quality of everything that I produced to the traders, in the sense that if I gave them bad intelligence, right, I was going to hear from them directly and it was going to negatively
Right.
impact my job. And that's still true today, right? I am still the one who is accountable for the intelligence that we release, right? Um, and that created a bias, at least initially, where I really wanted to hold on to everything myself, right?
Uh-huh.
It takes a lot of courage And it takes a lot of leadership to trust people below you, to delegate tasks out to make sure it gets done, and then to handle it in the right way, right?
Right.
When I delegate a task out to somebody, and inevitably a mistake is going to happen, it is so, so important that you handle that properly. You cannot
Right.
react emotionally, right? You need to react logically, and you need to simply explain to the person, right, what went wrong, what was expected, and empower them with the right tools to do it right, right? If you react emotionally, that may short term solve your problem. And I think that's why a lot of leaders do that, right? They just
Hmm.
get mad at the person who made the mistake. Long term, that's going to cause two problems. First of all, you're not going to create a work environment anybody wants to exist in.
Hmm.
So your best talent is going to leave you, right? And then second of all, you're going to insulate yourself from understanding the problems, right? There's a rule about hierarchies that bad information flows down a hierarchy and good information flows up it,
Hmm.
right? So, if you are not proactive about seeking out the bad information, and part of being proactive about it is about not reacting negatively to it and fostering a culture where it's okay to move fast and break things, right? I
Hmm.
talked about how speed is our advantage, right? You want
Yes.
to move fast. Well, guess what? When you move fast, you do break things, right?
Right.
So
Right.
I can't get mad every time somebody breaks something when I'm expecting them to go fast. And so, you have to handle that the right way. So people are okay with, and in fact, encouraged to come to you and tell you the bad news, right? I've seen so many hierarchies where people are terrified to give bad news to their boss. And
Hmm.
so then the boss isn't aware of it. So everybody at the top is like, man, everything is running great. Meanwhile, the ship is sinking,
Right.
right? It's
Right.
it's just a common cultural corporate problem,
Yeah,
that's been, a leadership lesson that I feel like I've learned, but I'm continuing to learn new things about it every day.
for sure. How about competitors? I mean, are there direct competitors or what's the competitive landscape?
Yeah, absolutely. There are definitely competitors in this space. There are competitors that have been doing this longer than we have, right? So, um, without naming any names, because I don't want to call anybody out, right? There are companies before SynMax was formed that were providing energy intelligence. There were companies that were providing maritime intelligence. Um, yeah, I think the reason why SynMax has been able to grow in this market is because we have something different about us, right? So,
Hmm.
so the competitive landscape in the data intelligence product world has been heavily biased towards open source data,
Okay.
right? And I like to say that there's nothing more expensive than free data. So,
Right.
there are satellite alternatives that are completely free to the privileged satellite data that we purchase, but it's lower frequency, it's lower, revolution resolution, it's less quality data. So, before SynMax was even started, there was an arms race of companies, right, trying to extract as much value as they possibly can out of all of these free data sets. And I think they
Uh-huh.
fell into kind of a mental trap, right? They were thinking, okay, if my cost is free, then my profit is
Right.
unlimited. It's whatever I can charge for it, right? So
Uh-huh.
everybody became addicted to this free data. And you have to think about it like every data set only has so much information entropy contained within it,
Uh-huh.
right? And when you analyze and extract information out of data, you can only do it to 100% of what that data set is capable of producing. So this market has matured in the open source space probably pretty close to 100%, right?
Okay.
And each marginal percentage point that you get out of that data, it takes an additional investment in data science to get it. So, my biggest cost is actually not my satellite imagery. It's like most businesses. My biggest cost is my employees and my people.
Uh-huh.
And so our competitors, they're spending tons and tons of money getting that extra 1 or 2 percentage points of value out of all this free data. Whereas I am able to spend far less money getting much better intelligence out of
Yeah.
paid data. And hey, good morning, Tony. um, and the result is that, I'm able to produce a better intelligence product at an overall lower fixed cost.
Mm, very good. How about any, I don't know, yeah, Grand, you're in hardcore startup mode here, but just future trends, opportunities that you're seeing out on the horizon that you and your team are most excited about.
Yeah. Um, So like I talked about before, on the demand side for our product, I think there's a lot of opportunities in data intelligence products becoming more standard as they um, as they expand to other types of businesses, right? So, we're primarily, selling to kind of the people who are willing to pay the highest price for it right now, and that is the maximum penetration we can achieve. But we're already
Mhm.
seeing signs that it's starting to grow into other types of businesses too. So I'm very excited about that, right? Particularly on the maritime domain awareness side. Um, we've seen that yes, governments absolutely need this kind of intelligence in their purchasing, but we, without really even reaching out to them, have started to get a signal from other industries like the insurance industry that they desperately need this kind of intelligence too, right?
Interesting.
So, an insurance company has a know your customer requirement. They need to know if the vessel they're insuring is engaging in sanction violations, right? They also want to know if
Sure.
the vessel is engaging in risky behavior. And the problem of the ocean is that there's not a lot of sensor coverage. That's why
Right.
satellites work so well there. Satellites work well in places where there's no competing sensors because satellites are very, very expensive.
Yes.
So in the ocean, it's pretty much AIS, which is a voluntarily reported transmission system where ships locally transmit their locations out unencrypted for the world to collect and then analyze, right? So anytime a ship wants to engage in illegal or risky behavior that they don't want their insurance company, they don't want the regulators to know about, they will either switch their AIS transponder off or they will spoof their location, which means they just broadcast a fake location. They'll
Huh.
continue on to their sanctioned port, but the location that they broadcast, because it's an unencrypted, uncontrolled system, is I'm not, heading over to that port. I'm doing something else entirely, right?
Interesting.
And so, yeah, we've seen a very strong demand signal, particularly in insurance companies, to get this type of intelligence. And so that's caused us to not necessarily pivot because we're still very focused on satisfying the needs of our government customers, but really expand into repackaging this data into a way that insurance companies can use it to solve their problems. And I think we're going to continue to see that expansion. So that's on the demand side. On the supply side, the sensor space is constantly growing, and the costs are getting cheaper and cheaper. We're seeing more and more satellites go up. We're seeing higher and higher resolution. We're seeing faster and faster revisit rates, and we're seeing new novel kinds of sensors in space. When everybody thinks of a satellite, they always think of an optical camera, right?
Sure.
That's just one of many different sensors. Optical cameras are great. You can get rich intelligence on, but they have disadvantages. First one is, your capture time is immediately cut in half because you can't take pictures at night. If you do, they're not very good pictures. There are
Right.
constellations that take night pictures, but that is only used for studying bright things, right?
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
um, and also they have the problem of clouds. Most people don't think about clouds. Everybody in
Yes.
the optical satellite space spends a lot of their time thinking about clouds. At any given time, 60% of the Earth is covered in clouds at any given time, right? So
Wow.
it's actually so now you've taken all of your sensor collection opportunities, you've cut them in half because you only have day, and then of day you then cut them down by 60% to just 40% of one half. So now you're down to
Huh.
20%, right, of what is available for you to actually capture. Now we're starting to see a lot of sensors launching in space. They're called SAR satellites, and they've been around since the 50s. This is not a novel technology, but it's always been, only governments could afford it, manufacture it. So it stands
Okay.
for synthetic aperture radar, and it's an antenna that it blasts out a radio frequency signal, and then it reads the return. And it can blast out the signal through clouds. It can blast out the signal at night, and it can then reconstruct a pretty good
Huh.
picture of the ground anytime you want it. And we've seen huge growth in that. And then there's satellite constellations being launched with just listening antennas, right? They can pick up any kind of radio frequency transmission and they can geolocate it. That's
Huh.
valuable for MDA, right? You can pick up the radar signals that ships are broadcasting, even when they've turned their AIS off. You can pick up cell phone signals. You can pick up, and those are encrypted. I don't want anybody to freak out, right? You
Right.
pick up the
Right.
signal, you geolocate it. You can't listen to a conversation, right?
Yeah.
But you can start to locate and get this additional intelligence from these constellations, and it's very exciting.
That is fascinating. That's unbelievable. How about I don't know, just strategies that have proven, I mean, especially in your CFA days before launching this too. I mean, just strategies that have proven most effective for identifying and capitalizing on high growth opportunities. Like, how do you find those opportunities and then just exploit them and capitalize on them?
Yeah, honestly, I've never had a problem finding the opportunities. Like the number of opportunities we have are so much greater than our capacity to be able to capitalize on them.
Sure.
I think the real trick is being able to identify which ones have legs, right?
Mm,
You could have a very exciting sounding idea for an intelligence product or a very exciting technology that you think you might be able to develop, into a novel data source. Um, but if it is novel, then it's an unproven market, right? And so then it's a thought experiment about, well, how large do I think this market is? Who do I think would actually buy it? And it's very hard to get that right, right? A good example is, we had a product that we launched, I don't know, a year and a half ago, where, we were using a technique called satellite photogrammetry. And we were using it in a way that I think was an application nobody had really applied before. Like we were able to take basically different satellites, different images taken at different time, and generate a 3D model of a coal pile on the ground. And because of
Wow.
my energy trading background, I happen to know that coal to gas switching is one of the important fundamental components that traders look at. So if we can measure these coal piles, we know their inventory. We can then make predictions about how much they're planning on running compared to gas plants, and that's tradable information that can help people better price both commodities. So we developed it, and it sounded very exciting, but we discovered that the number of people who actually go into that level of detail, when they're performing fundamental analysis, was just smaller than we thought, right? It was a successful product. We correctly made the technology. It was a novel application of the technology. Like everything was success, check, check, check. But the last box at the end, the most difficult one to figure out is, well, what's your total addressable market for it?
Yes.
It's much smaller than we thought it was. So we pivoted that product, right, and moved it into something else. So I don't think the challenge is getting enough opportunities. Like I've got a list a mile long of things I would love to do if I had the resources. The challenge is proving out which ones have the best addressable market that it's worth pursuing them, and then being able to move fast and iterate. So when you do
Yes.
get that list and you do decide to go after something, you have to be able to get an MVP up, test it out to market as quickly as possible,
Hmm.
right? Determine what the true demand signal is. And if the demand signal doesn't show up, you have to have the humility to then pivot away to something else, right?
Yes.
Like you can't keep throwing money after something thinking, oh, it's just going to be another so many dollars of investment, and I'm sure that demand signal is going to show up.
Yeah. How about what's one of the biggest challenges you've faced so far in building the business and how have you overcome it?
Oh gosh, so many challenges. It's hard to pick just one to talk
Mm.
about. Yeah, I mean, this has been an amazing learning adventure for me. I'm learning something new every day. I'm trying my best to stay humble and curious, so that I'm always improving myself, recognizing my mistakes, I'm making it better. I mean, we've had challenges, everything from uh, you know knowing how to identify an employee that is a good fit for a position, right?
Okay.
Um, some people are really good at interviewing.
Right. That's very,
That's a
very
skill
true.
set,
Very true.
right? And a good interview doesn't always lead to a good employee. And then also, sometimes when an employee is not performing well in a particular position, it's no detriment to the employee, right? I've discovered that you simply have to ask them, well, where do you think you could add the most value to the business? And the benefit of being a startup, all of us wear a lot of hats, right? So there's
Uh-huh.
usually some kind of tangentially related place you can put that person where they succeed. I've seen that happen. I've seen it happen where we've had an employee who, wow, this person is not performing. We're trying to work with them, we're trying to get them up, and then we just ask them, well, where do you think you can add value here, right? Move them over, and all of a sudden they're one of our rock stars,
Uh-huh.
right? I think a lot of people would make the mistake of being like, well, this is an underperforming employee. We're going to put them on a PIP. We're going to, kind of ratcheting the screws down. But yeah, maybe it's actually that you're not applying them to the right place. We've learned lessons about the right way to market our product. We've learned lessons about the right way to approach a market where there's a lot of existing competitors already, right? So like on our oil and gas product, Hyperion, we were going into a very mature market, and we discovered very quickly that the strategy was not to copy a competitor. That is
Hmm.
not the strategy, right? It's not to look at a competitor and say, well, what do they offer? Let's create a list of features. Okay, let's do all those things, and then let's do it for a nickel less. We'll take the whole
Right.
market.
Yeah.
Never going to work, right? First of all, there's switching costs, right? People who are with a data provider, an intelligence provider that they are currently happy with, right? Even if you're willing to offer them a better price, they don't see a big value proposition because they have an internal switching cost trying to move over to your
Hmm.
system. So you're never going to achieve that. you have to offer something that's differentiated. You have to offer something that's better, or it's not worth going into that market at all. So with Hyperion, we created a far better product than anything that exists with our competitors. You know, they give, and again, I'm not going to name any competitors. I'm not trying to trash talk anybody, but if a
Sure.
competitor were to give a data set that is 1 month lagged, right? We found a way to get that same data set so it is as close to real time as possible. In the case of one of our data sets, right, one of our competitors was offering a month lag data set. We got it to, it is a 1 day lagged data set,
Wow.
right? So we didn't even say, okay, you're a month, we're going to do 29 days, 28 days, 27 days, right? Like, we pushed it as far as we could. We really figured out a way to try, because getting these images back from orbit takes a lot of time, right? So,
Sure.
so
I'm
that
sure.
is that is the smallest lag we'll ever have, right? So then we shrunk the process as much as possible for refining that intelligence into something that we can give to traders reliably, right? We can't just do it very quick and then revise it later, right? That would be worse than giving them nothing at all. We're giving them
Right.
bad information, right? We
Yeah.
had to maintain the same kind of quality while getting it to them as quickly as possible. So that was a lesson we learned. That was a challenge. When you go into a market, offer something that is much better than your competitors. Don't get into a price war on selling the same type of product.
Mm-hmm. How about, all sorts of economic things going on these days? How is just the broader, economy and things impacted the business or even your investment decisions? What to do next in the business?
Yeah, it is a really volatile market, I've been
Mm-hmm.
told. I try not to check my
Yes.
stocks.
Right. Exactly.
I like again, I'm a finance background,
Yeah.
and I've always been told that time in the market is better than timing the market.
Right.
Okay,
Yes.
just leave it alone. Don't react to every bit of news, right? Maybe, even if you see some opportunities, if, oh man, my favorite company is on sale, it's 20% off. All right. I have money that I'm willing to put at risk. I'm going to buy it and I'm going to hold that for the long term too.
Right.
Right. Now, from the business side, we're in a very defensible space that does not have a lot of impact from this kind of volatility, right? So, commodity trading actually benefits from
Sure.
commodity volatility.
Mm-hmm.
So it's actually a positive for traders, right? Because think of traders, their purpose in the market, the value they add to the world, they appropriately price the commodity, right? So that we have adequate supply and we don't have overcharging for consumers. So everybody benefits in it when you have knowledgeable traders coming in. And then they also act as a shock absorber, right? When we get non-fundamental big swings, they can come in and they can buy the dips and they can sell the tops and they can stabilize those markets a lot more and
Mm-hmm.
they can provide liquidity to keep that market as stable as it possibly can, right? So in that space, we're not really impacted. I think the tariff situation and its impact on energy is very interesting, and
Uh-huh.
we've also been able to kind of capitalize on that by using our data sets to show where opportunities may be to stabilize the market, where there's overreactions, right, to our customers. So we've been able to provide additional value hopefully to them through that. And then on the government side, that's considered a very defensible sector, right? A finance person will tell you that during a recession, defensible sectors are government services and healthcare, because they tend not to be so tied to the boom bust cycle swings of the economy. So I think we're a lot less impacted than another business would be during these same times.
Yeah. Have you had, other governments approach you other than,
Yeah.
yeah.
So we have existing government contracts, not just with the U.S., but also with U.S. allies.
Okay. Interesting. Yeah, that's fascinating. How about, you just talked about different traders or hedge funds, taking the information and interpreting it for themselves. But how about conflicts between just who your client base is in that space? Are you beholden to certain clients that precludes you from selling to other clients, or how does that work with this type of data?
No, we have no restrictions, right? So, all the data that we don't have any internal conflicts.
Hmm.
We're not trading the commodity,
Right.
right? We're not investing. We don't have an incentive to, bias our data one way or another. In fact, we have an incentive to be as unbiased as possible because
Right.
long term, if we are perceived as having a bias, we're going to damage our brand and it's going
Hmm.
to make us less competitive. As far as conflicts between clients, all of our communications between our clients are confidential, right? We're not,
Yeah.
if somebody tells us what their position and their thoughts and whatever on the market are, we're not going to run off and tell it to one of their competitors or anything, right? We keep it all confidential. I used to work in the business. We know how it works. We know that there are expectations. That people believe that this is a zero-sum game, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think that's necessarily true, but in some sense it is. And so, I don't want the people that I'm trading against to have any kind of advantage over me, right?
Yes.
By knowing my position or by knowing my views. And so, yeah, they're very manageable conflicts for us as long as, we continue to just maintain confidentiality and not bias ourselves in any way. And there's a long-term benefit to doing that.
Yeah. And then what, like, I mean, we know where the open source data comes from, but privilege, like where do you source the privileged data that you then go use? Is it, I mean, satellite companies or where do you get
Yeah,
that data
satellite
from?
operators.
Okay.
So, we work with a ton of different companies. A lot of them are public too. I'm sure everybody's, well, maybe they haven't, but there's a large satellite operator called Planet Labs. They have a constellation of optical satellites, a couple different constellations of optical satellites, actually. There's another one called Satellogic. They also specialize in optical satellites. We do, a lot of work with them. On the SAR side, there's a great company. They're not public yet. They're called Umbra, and they have a fantastic constellation of SAR satellites. They are, in my opinion, the most nimble and capable SAR satellites in the commercial space.
Interesting.
We also work with a company that does radio frequency space-based assets called Spire, and then another one called Unseen Labs. We build all of our products from the ground up to be data source agnostic.
Okay.
We're not going to build anything that then ties ourselves to a particular operator indefinitely. We want that agnostic capability just because we don't, not only do we not want to be tied to a single satellite operator, but we also want to be able to, get the additional value that comes from merging different data sources together. So,
Mm.
we build our models to be as agnostic as possible. They can operate on a satellogic image or a planet image or on a whatever image, right? With similar performance metrics. So that way we can enrich and bring in as many data sources as we possibly can when we need to, control the output quality of the intelligence.
Yeah. How about just operating in America and capitalist culture, name of our podcast, talk about just the beauty of living in a capitalist free market society. How has that benefited you in growing this business?
I don't think building a company like SynMax would be possible in any other country in the world, right?
Uh-huh.
Not disparagingly to any of our allies, right? I think America is completely unique in our value system. America has the best startup culture in the world. We have the
Mm-hmm.
best supporting industries for the startup culture, right? I think we have the best, VC capital that's available. We have, the most accepting finance sector to support, believe, invest in that, these startups can grow into larger companies and create value for the world. But I think we also have a large cultural advantage in that people here really believe that they can build something and change the world in a way that I don't think exists to the same degree in other countries. A lot of people here dream about one day I want to have my own startup. One day I
Uh-huh.
want to build a company, right? One day I want to, I want to produce something of value for the world, right? And I don't think I have not seen evidence that that exists to the same extent elsewhere. So I've always been a huge believer in the free market, with notable exceptions. I'm not a pure laissez-faire,
Uh-huh.
economics believer. I think that capitalism has proven itself to be the greatest value creator in the world, right? No
Mm-hmm.
other system has raised more people out of poverty. No other system has created, more wealth, more prosperity. This cornucopia of excess that the
Uh-huh.
entire world is now enjoying is because of free markets. But I also understand the limitations of it. Free markets, they're bounded in where they can operate optimally. So a good
Mm-hmm.
example of that is, you can arrive at a price that creates value for both producers and consumers when both producers and consumers have bargaining power.
Right.
So, capitalism does not work when you have a monopoly,
Right.
right? And that's why I think it is essential that we have an antitrust department. And I
Mm-hmm.
think it is one of the most essential parts of the government. A monopoly destroys value both in the short term and the long term. In the short term, it destroys value for consumers. In the long term, it destroys innovation, it destroys growth, right? A monopoly has no incentive to produce anything extra. They're just a rent seeker, and they're
Right.
just a draw on the economy. So I'd actually like to see a more aggressive antitrust department.
Uh-huh.
Again, not to name any names, but like I think it is so overdue. I'm so glad that they are finally suing Google. That is, I mean, they dominated the search market, and I should be careful saying this. Like we have a lot of stuff on GCP, but like they have dominated the search market for such a long time. You know, thank God there's been huge disruption in it, and also thank God the antitrust department is finally taking it seriously.
Yeah.
For consumers to benefit and for the long-term economy to benefit, you need competition. You
Right.
cannot have monopolies. Now, did they earn that position? Yes, they were disruptive. They earned it, right? Did Rockefeller earn his position? Yes, he was disruptive. He earned it.
Yes.
But there were this isn't a punishment for bad behavior. It is a necessary action for the benefit of everybody.
Uh-huh. How about any common misconceptions about capitalism that you encounter? And if you do, how do you address those?
Um, I don't know. I mean, I don't think Gordon Gekko did any favors for us, right?
Yeah.
The perception that capitalism is based entirely on greed, I think, is a misunderstanding of it. I think capitalism is based on uh, value creation through incentives, right, as opposed to value creation through force. It's not greed. It is that the allocation of resources, which are limited in any situation, should go to those that are able to do the most with it.
Mm-hmm.
Human emotion, regardless, it is a system that produces enormous value. So,
Yeah. How about any interesting ways you're
okay, yeah, give
using?
me like 10 minutes. Oh, you guys, are you doing that right now? I'm sorry. Oh, I need to drop the room. Let me just step in over here.
No, no
Sorry, I
worries.
forgot that was at 9. Sorry, guys. You're going to get a little office tour here.
This is exciting.
Go on, Ryan. You ready?
Absolutely.
Sweet. Morning. I totally forgot. We're launching a new product today. Here we go. I've got a room here. We're launching a new product today. It's called Production Studio. It's super
Uh-huh.
cool. We're doing a webinar, and when Tony was like production studio webinar, I thought he was talking about another meeting that we were starting in 5 minutes. But yeah, we're doing their webinar today to launch it.
So what is the new product?
Yeah. So we're able to track what are called completions, which are fracking events, right? So
Okay.
that's when a fracker shows up on a horizontal well, and they inject fluid at high pressure underground to fracture the rock and extract more oil and gas out of it. It is how almost all of oil and gas is produced in the United States today, right?
Yes.
And so from that, it's a very natural next step that you then model what's called the IP rate, which is the initial production of the well. So a well produces the fastest rate it will ever produce at the very beginning of its life, and then it declines over time, right? And because we have so much data, we know so much about the properties of the well, and we know so much about how the wells with those same properties have operated over time. We can very accurately predict what that production profile is going to look like, right? So for a very long time, almost since the beginning of Hyperion, we've been, forecasting with a high degree of accuracy what every single well is producing as soon as we see it get fracked, right? Then you stack all those predictions on top of each other, and you get
Yes.
a very accurate near-term production forecast, right? That you can then drill down. It's fully granular down to the individual well if you want to, right? Well, Production Studio is the next extension of that idea. So
Okay. what
what we're doing is we're basically saying, okay, so this gives us an accurate representation of what production is going to do in the next 60 days, which is hugely valuable. Traders can now see, have we hit an inflection point? Is this the top? Are we going to start declining? Is this the bottom? Are we going to start growing? Right.
Mm-hmm.
Very successful in capturing those inflection points. But the next extension is, okay, well, what happens after the 60 days? Well,
Right.
for that, you need assumptions. And the biggest assumption is, what do you think frac crews are going to do? Are we going to add crews? Are we going to take crews away? And where are we going to do that? So Production Studio is the ability for people to input their own assumptions on that and then see the resulting forecast as far as they want. And you can run it both ways. So you can both input the frac crews necessary to produce a production profile and see the results. You can input the production profile and see the frac crews that would be necessary to create that
Interesting.
profile. So it's super powerful. Very excited about it.
That's awesome. Well, very exciting. Yes. How about or just kind of just reflecting back, what any particular decisions or moves that you would say have been most pivotal to your success so far?
Um, I don't think there've been a lot of inflection point moves,
Hmm.
right? I think it is the sum of 1,000 mostly good decisions that
Yes.
creates a successful business, not just one or two. So, I think that what's most important is the philosophies that guide those decisions, to make them as well as possible. I think it is good to seek diverse input when you're making decisions, right? You have your own biases you're not aware of, right? So getting neurodiversity, getting people who think differently from you is powerful when they're in the room when you're making decisions because
Mm.
they can offer unique perspectives and you have a higher probability of making a good decision, right? So a great example of that is, my background, I did college and then I did finance and then I did this, right? We hire a lot of veterans here, tons of
Okay.
veterans. We actually
Okay.
won an award recently, for being a promoter of veteran hiring. And that's been a huge benefit because they have a very different background and
Mm.
a very different yet equally valid perspective, right? That then adds neurological diversity in decision making. So, having these different perspectives in the room when we're making all these different decisions, right? It creates just a little bit of a better chance that your sum of all your decisions are going to be net good instead of net bad.
Yes. Oh, very good. How about any interesting ways you guys are using AI in the business? I know that's,
Yeah. So
yeah,
as a data intelligence company, right, like AI is our
yeah,
bread and butter, right?
right.
It is one of the most powerful tools in the toolbox for data analysis, for sure. Um, I think that anytime a breakthrough comes in AI, there's a ton of hype, but that doesn't necessarily mean that there isn't something extremely valuable there. It just means that maybe it's being overstated. In the
Uh-huh.
case of LLMs, I think there is enormous value. I
Uh-huh.
think the hype is almost equal to the value. The hype is always going to be over it, but it's really close in this case. We've started experimenting with LLMs outside of kind of their traditional, using them for software development, using them to assist people, to actually like using them as an interface for exploring data, right? So like, every data set, every data product that we create, there's a back end and a front end. The back end is the data science component of it, the shaping of the actual results, into a refined data set. And then there's the front end, which is the way that the user interacts with the data. Of
Hmm.
course, you always have APIs; they can always get the raw data. You always have access to Snowflake and Excel and all these different ways for them to just get the raw data and shape it how they want. But most users of this also want a way to explore the data kind of natively. So
Hmm.
at the very least, they can do ad hoc analysis with it without having to pull it in themselves. And it's occurring to me that LLMs are the native way to interact with a data set, right? So there's always going to be a gap on a front end. You could produce the most perfect front end, but your goal is to try and create a front end that could handle any single user case when it comes to your data, right? So my
Uh-huh.
user wants to see this data set presented daily over time. Okay, I make a front end that shows a chart of that, right? But then another user likes to see the monthly averages of that same data set, right? And, um, shown in larger blocks. Okay, well, let me code up a front end that then,
Uh-huh.
allows that functionality. Okay, and then a different user wants to see that same data set, but they want to see the changes from one data point to another point, expressed as a derivative. Okay, let me code that up, right? That's you're always chasing all these user cases, and you're probably it's like a perfect heat engine, right? It's theoretically possible, but you'll never get to 100%,
Yeah,
right? There's always some gap between what the user wants completely and what your front end is able to deliver to them.
sure.
But with LLMs, it's almost like you don't need a front end, right? So I come from the trading world and I was a quant, which means, I'm an analyst and I basically work for a trader, right? And, the trader analyst relationship is, they have a trading idea and they want you to prove or disprove it,
Uh-huh.
right? And that's kind of the most basic one, but they also want you to generate unique insights so they can generate trading ideas, right?
Right.
Um, so they don't want their analysts to make them a front end, right? They don't want their analysts necessarily to produce a chart. They want to talk to them because that's the native way that we understand everything is by
Hmm.
talking, right? That's our language. That's how our brain works. And that's what an LLM could do, right? Imagine if a trader is like, hey, I really think that we are going to have a tight Some are based on X, Y, and Z fundamental factors, right? You could build a front end that lets them explore that, right? Or you could just ask an LLM that understands the data set to tell you the answer immediately. So I'm
Yeah.
really excited about that possibility. It seems like everybody's releasing a chatbot now, and it's just kind of like during the dot-com era when everybody was putting up a website, but they didn't really know why, right?
Uh-huh.
Like, yeah, we have a website, right? It seems like that's what everybody's doing, right? So like finding the right way to use an LLM so that it's actually solving customer problems and not just like, oh, I've got an LLM bot on the side of my website. I click on it and I can talk to it, and it has some knowledge about SynMax, right? Maybe it's a
Yes.
sales tool, maybe it's a whatever. Like I would love to be able to go to an LLM and say, hey, I see that frac crews are up 10%. Tell me what is responsible for that move? And then have the
Mm.
LLM come back and say, well, the move seems to be focused in this region. And in that region, it seems to be these operators. And those operators, interestingly, here's what they said on their most recent earnings about their production goals. Therefore, it seems they are over or under or appropriately stating, right? That's the work an analyst would do. I don't think there's any reason why an LLM couldn't do something like
For
that.
sure.
Yeah.
That's it. What about agents, AI agents?
Just for like customer service inquiries or
I mean, I don't know how you, I mean, for workflows, I mean, is that something that's you're exploring or have, or doing, or is that just, or does that seem like an old idea to you or?
no, it doesn't seem like an old idea. So, like, we're using like I think so. So one application of AI that I think is also super promising is AI in software development. So everybody talks about like AI, will it take jobs? I haven't seen evidence of that yet. It
Mhm.
seems like it's just another tool of leverage that just
Sure.
makes people more productive, that just pushes us up the value chain, right? The counter argument being, okay, aha, it pushes you up the value chain. Therefore, right, we are able, our GDP is so many trillions of dollars. We are able to produce that same GDP with less people because we've levered all of them. Therefore, there's going to be this many people unemployed. I'm like, wait a minute, there's no cap on GDP. There's no
Right,
cap
right,
on value
right.
that can be produced, right? Let's take GDP to 100 trillion a year. Like, why not, right? Let's create the most efficient, uh, you know, uh, rich society that we possibly can with these tools of leverage. So, in software development, AI has a particular proficiency, but it also has a deficiency that is difficult to handle. So, if you ever heard of this idea of vibe coding,
Vibe coding. No.
brand new term. I think it's
Huh.
like a month old. Okay,
Really?
so vibe coding is the idea that you make a complete software project without writing a single line of code, only using AI, right? And it immediately has attracted a huge negative connotation to it because I would say the majority of vibe coders are amateurs who are then just going into a tool like Cursor or Copilot and saying, make me an app that does X, make me a script that does Y. And the AI spits out its version of what it thinks you want. And it's closed, it's not closed, you iterate on it, it gets a little bit better. But what ends up happening when an amateur is at the helm of this tool of leverage, just like if you put an amateur in a race car, right, is the entire project eventually collapses,
Uh-huh.
right? Software development is not just writing code. Software development is project management. It's
Mm.
understanding how to structure it so that your code is maintainable and
Mm.
scalable, right? You can be two pieces of code that do the same thing. Any software developer can look at it and tell you which one's better, right?
Uh-huh.
Because one code has not followed an appropriate structure or to a lesser degree. And so it cannot be easily maintained. It cannot be easily scaled, right? It is good for what it is right now, but there's no extra value that can be rinsed out of it. Another
Mm.
piece of code, when it's been written in the right way, when it's understandable, right? When it's scalable, when it abstracts its general ideas into functions and then operates those functions, for example, right? That is a powerful piece of code that it's easy to take it and turn it to something even bigger and just keep
Uh-huh.
growing and growing and growing on it.
Huh.
And so, basically what you're doing, I believe, if vibe coding could be correctly put in the hands of knowledgeable software developers who understand the difference between good code and bad code, good projects, bad products, good practices and bad products. Do they have tests? Do they have, do they have supporting documentation? Do they have good comments, right? Have they followed a code review process, right? All the things that a good software developer do. put vibe coding in the hands of them. And I believe you may be able to one day transform every single programmer into a project manager.
Huh.
And that's a huge uplift in value, right?
Yes.
Instead of I need a team of programmers to work on a single project, every single programmer works on his or her own project, right? I don't believe we're there yet, but these tools are becoming so much more powerful so quickly, right? I think that is the next big step, software development, AI.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
How about just advice for entrepreneurs, whether it's young people wanting to start or someone going from corporate wanting to launch their own venture? Any advice you'd give to aspiring entrepreneurs?
Um, Honestly, I think because I always wanted to be an entrepreneur.
Uh-huh.
My grandpa was an entrepreneur, my mom was an entrepreneur, right? A lot of entrepreneurs in my family. I'd always wanted it. I think it's no secret. The hardest part of becoming an entrepreneur is getting the resources to be able to do it, right?
Mm-hmm.
You got two avenues out there. One, you can raise money, right? Raise money through your own network. Most people don't have a network. Raise money through VCs. You know, that is there's a lot of things VCs want to see to be able to give you money. They're not writing easy checks. Even during the loosest times of VCs, there was never easy money. Okay.
Yes.
And then bootstrapping.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, Bootstrapping is out of reach for the majority of people, right? I have obligations. I have a family. I have bills. I have things like I cannot quit my job, take my income to zero, and build a company, right? Within a time horizon where I won't go bankrupt,
Uh-huh.
right? So I think the best path for an aspiring entrepreneur is to build a valuable skill set relevant to the area where they want to build a business, right? That's a free option. So, um, you know, pivot your career path towards becoming the expert that you need to understand this intimately, right? And then that makes it a much safer bet if you do need to raise money, right? Or if you do need to get the capital necessary to be able to build a business, okay? A VC does not want to hear that someone who worked in healthcare their entire career thinks they can build an oil and gas business, right?
Right.
Your best case is going to be to develop yourself as an expert to get access to the capital necessary to get a business started. And then, I mean, also that's only going to improve. And the reason that works is because it's only going to improve the odds of success for the business itself.
Yeah.
So, if that is people's mission, I know there's a lot of entrepreneurs who are super young and they want to go straight off the graduation stage into entrepreneurship. And I think that honestly, that probably is the first window where you do have an opportunity,
Right.
right?
Yes.
Because you have no attachments at that time and you
Mm-hmm.
can take the financial risk to bootstrap yourself. But I think for everybody who that window has passed, right, the best way you can do it is make yourself an expert, a respected expert in your field. And then you have an opportunity to move into it.
That's excellent advice. I've asked this question many, many times, and that may be one of the best answers I've heard. That's excellent
Wow, thank
advice.
you.
You're
Yeah, I mean,
welcome.
how do you make yourself a respected expert? You may be an expert. I mean, I think you need to worry about your image in the industry, right?
Mm-hmm.
You should be seeking to speak at conferences. You should be, creating an X account or a LinkedIn account where you are, providing valuable insight for free to the world and showing people that you are an expert in this and, convincing them that you have something, a unique perspective to offer them. So become a known quantity. And, today the tools to be able to do that are so massive because of
Right.
social media.
Yes. It's unbelievable. How about and maybe it's too early in the journey, but legacy. How do you think about building a lasting legacy through SynMax or just through your business ventures, through your life?
I don't think I've ever really thought of that before. That's
Hmm.
interesting. Like a personal legacy
I mean, it could, yeah, it could be
or like just a lasting legacy for the company.
either or whatever,
Yeah.
whatever
I mean,
comes to mind.
honestly, I've never really thought about a personal legacy.
Yeah.
That sounds to me like something that might, the people who pursue that probably have a problem with humility. And I think humility is one of the most valuable character features that you can have is being humble.
Yes.
Um, so if you're worried about your legacy, if you want like a book or a movie starring Brad Pitt or a statue of yourself somewhere, ironically, you're probably less likely to build a legacy. But as
True.
far as a legacy for SynMax, like
Yeah.
I would like SynMax to be a company that lives in perpetuity, right?
Hmm.
Be an entity that is able to create value for the world long past the time that I'm in my years where I'm able to contribute to it,
Yeah.
right? I think it's capitalizing on a growing need for intelligence. I think, 20 years ago, there was no such thing as an intelligence company. Um, I think back to the early days of the internet, all that value early on in the internet, obviously it's grown since then. It was all built on advertising,
Right.
right?
Right.
Every Google search, the way they paid for that was with the ads. Every YouTube video, the way they paid for that was with the ads. Social media was the ads, right? So it is one component of every single business, their marketing and their advertising was able to fuel the entire industry that is the internet, right? And I think that there is a corollary for the intelligence industry, which is a brand new industry, right?
Mm.
What are we serving? We're serving the need for businesses to have a better understanding about their market so they can better compete, and a better understanding about the world. And I think that need is larger, frankly, than their marketing department, although they
Mm.
may not realize it yet. So, I mean, I believe that the intelligence industry could become a massive industry, in the next 30 years.
Yes.
So when I think about legacy, I would like SynMax to be a leader in that.
Hmm. Oh, very good. How about last question? Success. What's your personal definition of success? And you can take that any direction you want.
Oh, geez. Yeah, and it's hard to come up with one definition because success means something different to everybody, doesn't it?
It
You
sure
know,
does.
people, people want to be, they they want to achieve in different areas. Success for one person, right, could be that they want a stable job, right? That they want to not have to worry, they want something where they're not in a volatile environment, where, they have achieved stability, where they have achieved, a comfortable lifestyle, without having to, subject themselves to the big swings of the market, which, is what you have to do when you're in a startup. Like it is the
Right.
most volatile place you could possibly be,
Yes.
and that might be success to them. So, I think success is a personal definition. I think it's based on what people want to achieve out of their lives. And I know this sounds like a cop out answer, but I don't think you can apply unilaterally like a standard for success and say people
Uh-huh.
are successful or not successful, based on this mark that I'm just going to draw across everyone.
Hmm.
I think it's something that people understand themselves, and they know when they've achieved what they wanted to, out of their lives, and they can consider themselves successful validly.
Yeah. Perfect. Well, good. Eric, this has been fantastic and absolutely fascinating. So thank you so very much. And we'll share in the notes, how people can get in contact with you, learn more about SynMax. But thank you so very much. This has been an absolute pleasure. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you. Really appreciate it.
Oh, my pleasure.